Hey, Doug and Pat here with another episode of the Wealthy Gym Owners. And today we're going to talk about a really common thing that we encounter with owners, why you don't feel ready to own and operate a $500,000 a year gym. So, Doug, I mean, we see a lot of people in that one to $300,000 a year stage where, by some measures they're doing okay, and by others maybe it's a challenge or a struggle. But it can feel a little bit overwhelming or intimidating to think about having a gym that's doing a $500,000 a year, three-quarters of $1 million a year, $1 million a year. And so I think sometimes people get paralyzed, they get stuck. So, what do we tell them? Where do we start in helping them kind of break through this mental barrier, this sticking point?
I mean, the first thing I would tell them is just like you tell your clients, you're not going to get there overnight. I've yet to meet a gym owner that was doing 200 grand one year and $1 million the next year, right? That's not how this business scales. It's much more of a gradual a gradual climb, and hopefully it's an upward climb, right? But it might be 200, then 300, then you might have a quantum leap to 500 or 600, but you're not going to go from 200 to 800 in a year. It's just not how the service industry works. So setting expectations would certainly be one starting point. The other starting point is like having been at all of those levels, you got to pick your problem and I personally think 500 to 750 is the sweet spot where but that's my sweet spot. I think that's what I would say is like figuring out what do you actually want from the business? How much do you want to make personally? What do you want your role to be? Because at all those different sizes, your role is different. How you run your week is different. And that may not be just because it's a higher revenue, it may not be your ideal role.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember having that conversation with a business partner of mine many years ago, like saying, man, I think my sweet spot is at this stage, right? Like once we have to have an HR department and that sort of thing, I'm out. Like that's not entrepreneurial for me. And maybe plenty of people feel like that is, but you gotta know where that kind of sweet spot is for you. And I also think that, you know, it, I mean, we're dealing with owners, but they're people, and change is scary, right? Like we tend to default to the things we're comfortable with, the things we're already good at, and what is required to go from, you know, $150,000 or $200,000 a year, that training gym that's doing somewhere in the teens every month, to a gym that's doing 40 or 50. Your role, your responsibilities shift, and you probably don't have a whole lot of experience in it, right? Like you've not been somebody who's been a consistent marketer. You've not been somebody who's had to lead a team and have staff meetings, and that may feel a little too corporate-y for you, which in hindsight, I mean, that's probably a really comfortable level for me, whereas the having having a board and having HR and having that sort of stuff would feel too corporate for me. So I mean, I understand, but I also think that we've talked about it in other episodes. I talk about it very regularly. We can draw a lot from what we do for clients, right? Like we want something better, and I don't know a whole lot of people in our industry. Like there just haven't been a whole lot of training gym owners who have retired. When I got into this, I'm like, you don't know any trainers who've retired. But now we're starting to see a few, but there's just not much in the way of longevity here if you don't evolve. There's not a whole lot of people who are running $12,000 a month gyms all the way up to retirement because A, I don't know that it ever pays them enough that they can actually retire. But B, that's just it's a hard, it's a hard job at that stage. So, understanding that, if we want to stay here, we got to evolve our role and we've got to get out of our comfort zone and all those, things that we teach to our clients, I think is something we have to lean into ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I think some reality of the landscape we're in, both as an industry, but also just economically, and in how much we need to personally make from a business has changed over time. Like I remember when I first got into this whole gym ownership thing 15 years ago, it was like a pipe dream to make 100 grand, right? Like I was like, there's no way. And if I do that, I will be set for life. And it's like the reality is nowadays to be able to have a net owner benefit of 100 grand, one, you're going to need, if you're assuming, going back to previous episodes where we break down the 40, 30, 30. If you want to net 100 grand, your business is probably, depending upon, a couple factors, you're going to need to make 300 or 400 grand a year top line. And so understanding that, A, that's how much my top line needs to be, but B, unfortunately, I would love for this not to be true, but unfortunately, 100 grand doesn't take you as far as it did, 10, 15 years ago. And so, creating I think an expectation that if you're doing, like you said, 12 grand a month, one, there's no way you're keeping all of that. And two, it just unfortunately puts us in a tough situation when we look at how much we're actually, benefiting from the business.
Yeah, we're in the middle of finalizing the collection of our annual revenue numbers for clients, and it's fun for me to see because when I first got into this industry, I mean, there were courses and products and things out there that talked about a six-figure gym and six-figure business. They were talking top line, not like net owner benefit or anything like that. And now, I mean, heck, we've got a handful of gyms that did over 1.7 million this past year. We've got a bunch of owners that are doing upwards of 700,000. And even in our kind of first stage program, the accelerator program, there are a bunch of people doing what would have been, top the food chain type of numbers back in the day. They're doing that now. So I mean, it's fun to see, but the world's evolved. What things cost, it's certainly evolved. The market has also gotten to a point that your business isn't very durable if you're probably under $20,000 a month because competition's only going to continue to increase. The cost to acquire clients is going to go up. We talked about in previous episode, the retention numbers are harder to hit than they've been in the past. So, you've got to operate a little bit better if you still want to be successful.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And, again, I think numbers have evolved. And I think as an owner, when we talk about like changing your identity, just like maybe a six-figure income might seem completely absurd, even though that's, somewhat needed slash normal nowadays. It's the same thing on the front end with your pricing. Like I remember when I was doing 200 grand a year with location one, to charge 199 bucks a month was a big deal. Right. And now, like, every group X studio on the block is 199. Like that's the base. Right. Or charging 30 or $40 a session for small group. And I was like a complete, anomaly. Now that's the average. Right. So just, some of this is, if you've been in the industry for 5, 10 plus years, kind of coming to facing a little bit of reality that like 300 bucks for a gym membership in a training gym is pretty normal now versus, 10 years ago, that was a complete unicorn.
Yeah. So I think to kind of pull all this together, I would say that it's totally normal not to feel ready for an achievement that's beyond where you are. Right. I think that that's just you know, pursuing goals that are kind of out in our windshield, that we've yet to achieve, it should feel a little bit uncomfortable. We should feel like we're a little bit short of it because we're only ready for things that we've experienced, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't be prepared. It doesn't mean you can't put yourself in an environment to do it. It doesn't mean that you can't adopt the behaviors and the habits and the systems of people who are already there. You can't learn from, I mean, you certainly should learn from the experiences, the pitfalls that other people have had. But, I think that that's totally normal, but that's part of the fun of entrepreneurship too, is pursuing something that's a little bit out of your grasp. And, I think, Doug, you touched on this earlier, and it's important to appreciate. We don't see people, even though I've seen plenty of people tell me that's what they want to do. Oh, I did 120 grand this year. I want to do 1 million next year. Like, that's not how this works in this industry. But, having realistic but inspiring targets and then creating an environment that gives you the best chance to get there. And then hopefully your environment, whether it's coaching and something like what we do with Project 500 and Boardroom or something else, helps kind of pick you up and dust you off when something doesn't go quite as planned, because that's just inevitable in business. But yeah, I mean, it's totally normal not to feel ready, but it's also your responsibility as an owner to still move forward if you don't feel ready by preparing well.
Yep. Yep. And I think, you touched on it there at the end, but having, whether it's a coaching program or something, having accountability as entrepreneurs, we often, we've chosen this I'm my own boss, which comes with a potential upside. But one of the downsides is there's nobody telling you what to do. You don't have any accountability. And so putting yourself in a program where, again, obviously we're biased with Project 500, but I think the accountability is, if I talk to the folks that are in there, that's probably one of the biggest things that they hit on that they enjoy, is just the weekly accountability. So finding yourself an environment where, if you're, feeling capped, you're feeling overwhelmed. Yeah, you got to learn the strategies, but frankly, it's more the implementation and the weekly accountability of those strategies.
So there you go. If you don't feel ready, there's the solution. And that's another episode of the Wealthy Gym Owners signing off.